Welcome to the Hawks Hunt CISO Sandbox, the Fishbowl edition. We have two of our All-Star League managers here with us today. We have the Department of Defense CISO and House of Representatives politician, Katie Arrington. And welcome, Katie. And we also have Larry Whiteside. So we'll talk today a little bit about our fantasy football teams and about moneyballing cybersecurity budgets and how those two things can connect. Let's go ahead and first start with introducing ourselves. So, Larry, go ahead and introduce yourself, talk about where you are and what's brought you to this point of your career, and a little bit about your fantasy football team.
Yeah. So thank you, Elliot. I appreciate this. I like having these types of conversations. So Larry Whiteside Jr., I am currently in an Uber, but I'm the CISO of an organization called Grayscale. I've been in this industry almost 30 years. I'm a former Air Force officer, and I've held more CISO positions than I can count or care to count. And I ended up where I'm at today because I had finally hit my wall in the typical CISO realm of the day-to-day operational stuff. And I found a company that was actually solving a problem and not just putting lipstick on a pig. So I decided that, I turned 50 this year. It's time for me to do something that I really want to do. And so that's sort of how I got to this point right now with being with Grayscale.
Good for you, Larry. Looking good at 50, man.
Thank you.
Katie, please, you have a fascinating background. Let's hear all about it and about your experience here with the Fishbowl as a league manager.
So thank you for having me. Good to see you both virtually. So I am Katie Arrington, the former Chief Information Security Officer for the Department of Defense in acquisition and sustainment. So I was over about $380 billion worth of your tax dollars spent every year to make sure it was cyber secure. One of my favorite things is that I am the mother of the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, the CMMC. That was my baby. I started that in the Department of Defense as a huge passion to get unified cybersecurity standards. Prior to that, I did serve in the State House of South Carolina, actually wrote the first state's cyber disaster plan, coming from the great state of South Carolina, where we had a few hiccups along the way in our networks, and let's talk about my fantasy football league. I am second to last in the league. I apparently am a horrible judge of character, and I've learned that just because I love a team, the Steelers, I should not rely on their defense just because I love their coach. And that I need to look at the value of what the return on investment is on my players that are out on my league every week, and not on who I really, really like. So I've learned a lot. And this week I'm up against the juggernaut, right? I'm a scared. I won't lie. I was retrading and I was switching up players left and right and asking my husband and my son, who is a diehard football fanatic. But I will mention this. I am in Florida to go to the Dolphin Steeler game on Sunday night, right? But I am not going with the Steelers defense. I am not having that. And I've had my hiney hit to me being second in the league. So, I mean, that's second to last.
So listen, I would go with the Steelers defense against the Dolphins because their quarterback play is like up in the air, right? Tua might be back, but Tua might only last a quarter. So I actually would go with the Steelers defense. So my fantasy football management style is really interesting because I've been playing for years. I've got a money league that I've been playing in since like the early 2000s. And so, but it's interesting that what I've learned in playing for so many years and in different leagues is that every league, you must adapt your style, right? Because your drafting style does not carry across. And when I think about that, it's the same thing in cybersecurity as it relates to building a team, right? The way you build a team must adapt to the industry and the organization that you're in. And so for me, when I went into this league and I utilized the same drafting style that I did in my money league, I didn't really get what I was hoping to get because other people were drafting very differently than what I'm accustomed to based on the other leagues I've played in. So I think it's important to think about that in context when you're building a security team, that you can't be cookie cutter in how you build your team based on this is how I've always done it.
Yeah, amen on that one. I couldn't agree more. I mean, every position that I've held, from working, as a legislator, owning my own business, software development firm, to, leading the DoD, none of the players on the bench have been the same. And how I've constructed teams has never been, the same, because you've got to look at what your players are doing, right? Your capabilities. And, prior to jumping on and recording this, we were discussing, how do you know when to put the second string in, right? And know that your quarterback has been passing incredibly well, right? And he's doing a great job, but your defense is just not doing their job on the other side. How do you know when? And I think as CISOs, as we're going through this, and I say we're in a revolution of our capability. So I'm 51, soon to be 52. So those of us in our 50s who finally figured out what we wanted to be when we grew up, I am one of them. And I look at the CISO's job from a very, we were talking about, Ellie and I were speaking about it. The CISO is like a conductor or a coach, right? They should have some technical background, some capability. I can code. I will say it's not my strongest strength, right? But what I do understand is first and foremost, translation, right? So you have to think of how, even in football, right? Special teams have a unique way of communicating with each other, especially when they're on the field, so that nobody else can see what they're talking about, right? That's the whole concept of a special team. When you look at the CISO and what their role is, it's translating all the different languages that are spoke within a company, from profit and loss to security to information technology, information assurance, because none of those are the same. I mean, it's really funny that people lump them all together, right? There's compliance, there's supply chain risk management, there's a whole mix. And the CISO is the one person who can translate for all of them. That's the uniqueness about that capability and why they're so critical. The coach is the most critical point on a football team, right? The coach sees the strengths and the weaknesses in all the players. He also sees the strengths and the weaknesses within his assistant coaching teams. And he has to know when to put the right people in, but he never does anything other than put the right people in, right? It's just, I think that's the CISO's, sweet spot, is we're the coach, right? And we know when to say yay and get involved, but we also know when to step back and let the special teams take over.
Well, and that's an interesting point you bring up, right? Because I think a lot of CISOs sometimes get too deep into the weeds. You never see coaches going down and lining the punt up to show the kicker how to punt. You never see coaches going down and going out with the quarterback, right, to show the quarterback a better throwing motion. No, you have a quarterback coach, right? You literally give instruction and say, hey, I don't think that the execution here is aligned to my expectation. And you then help better align and communicate that to the coaches, right, which would be, from a CISO standpoint, our leaders that report into us to say, hey, this is what I need. Here are the outcomes I'm expecting. Right now, you go execute. And if you have a challenge with executing that deserves a conversation. Let's figure out how we can better align to make sure that happens. Or I find someone else who can execute.
And that point exactly is, Elliot, I don't mean to, this is incredibly fun, considering I'm just a novice football fan, but I understand coaching. The thing that's right now, and I think the biggest conversation that the CISOs are having, is getting into the C-suite, getting into the executive level and saying, we need to be compliant in these areas. but what is the cost of compliance? What products, what capabilities, what special teams provide a return on investment, right? Is it worth the value of what you're investing? And when you look at your lineup in the fantasy football league, you have to look, if you have Tom Brady as the quarterback, right, you're paying hella lot for Tom, right?
Right.
But
Right.
but you want a Jerry Judy on your team, right? And it's like you've got to be able to balance out that sometimes it's the combination of capabilities that gives you the best return on investment instead of just going with a big brand name one,
Right.
right? Like Tom Brady's a lot to put on one person, and that's a lot of money out of your budget to have on this one capability that may or may not have a problem. You should have risk reduction strategies within your lineup, within your repertoire, to bring to the C-suite, to bring to the executives and say, hey, listen, we can go with this A solution, we can go a managed service provider. In my world, it's the Department of Defense trying to get those guys compliant to the NIST 171, which they should have been doing since 2013. But how do I get them there, right?
Right.
Is it better to give a small business or a small team a team in a box, essentially, cybersecurity as a service, and give them a managed service provider and a cloud service provider, train them how to log on, and get into an IL5 cloud and be secure? Or is it better to build a team organically, right? Go through the drafts picks and set up your lineup. It depends on what type of company you're at and the dollars that you have available. And I can stop there because I'm monopolizing the combo.
No, you're fine. I mean, I'm nodding right in agreement because I've been the CISO of large global organizations and small national organizations, and there's so many factors that go into trying to determine what you insource versus what you outsource, where you spend resources, right, from a tech standpoint, where you spend resources from a people standpoint, where do you pay the premium for a heavy hitter on your team versus where do you go a little cheaper and you can get somebody in that you can train and help upskill. There's a lot of balance to that. And it really differs based on the organization, based on your threat landscape, based on all of these different things that you have to take into consideration. Just like in the football world, right? Every week you're looking at your lineup and you have the ability each week to make changes based on what in the cyber world would be a threat landscape, but in this is your opponent, right? Looking at who your opponent's going to be. What does this matchup look like? Is the quarterback that I have, does he have a proper matchup that's going to allow me to take advantage of the cost associated with him? Or do I need to go and upskill in a receiver area because my quarterback is not going to provide me the points and the outlook and the expectation that I need or I typically get from them? So I need to upskill there. And that's where the draft becomes a huge balance because you have to gamble on maybe some less known players in certain areas in hopes that they will overperform and outperform expectation, right? Versus you've got some very steady players, and how much are you willing to pay to get those first round picks into certain areas? Do you want a quarterback first? Do you want a running back first? Well, running backs have a higher injury plane. Like there's so many different things to think about, and it's the same thing as it relates to building the staff.
Amazing points by the two of you. Me and the audience, we're all here to learn from you. So I'm happy to turn this over to you, Katie and Larry, and riff on this subject a little further. And I'm really curious about now. Sorry, go ahead, Katie.
Oh, I was just going to say that this is the analogies are great. I was actually just thinking about, going with a really well-known piece of software, et cetera, in your it also is the highest value target, right? So when Tom Brady walks onto the field, everybody's going to hit Tom, right? So you've got to think about what you're doing, right? Is the distraction of something like that really, really good? Or is it, are you using it to your benefit? There's a bunch of stuff I could brief off on this just because my time in the Department of Defense, every time, we recommend, or the government, which is, hard fought in the fact that, they shouldn't be recommending product, right? That's one of my big things, is that the Department of Defense specifically knows, to do two things really, really well: squelch and kill innovation, right? And how to teach people not to be to take risks. And there's this analogy that I'd love to give you guys. It's called the Great Spitball War. All right. And I've been talking about this for years, and it applies to what we're talking about here. So you put in a room the allies and the adversaries, right, into a team. Everybody has the same technical background, the same capabilities, the same resources, right? And but this is exactly what you go through in corporate America for a CISO every single day. So the mediator comes in and says, okay, the referee says, the most spitballs on the wall in 1 hour wins. And timer starts. The adversaries go immediately, and they're not really communicating with each other. They're all just going out and getting, their own individual teams. They're getting whatever liquid they could find, whether it's blood, baby formula, water, milk, they don't care. They're throwing it in. Anything that looks remotely like paper, they're throwing in, and they're just throwing stuff at the wall. Then you have us, right? How we function and how corporate America functions and the US government functions. We argue about leadership for the first 10 minutes because that's the most important thing, right? Leadership of a project. And then we argue for 10 minutes that we finally figure out who should lead it. Then we argue about resourcing it. Who's going to pay for it? Where's it going to come from? And then we spend 10 more minutes arguing about, well, where are we going to resource the resources from, because there's risk in that. And then at the 40-minute mark, we've had an election cycle from one of our partners, and we have to start back at zero again because they're not agreeing to the resources that were originally agreed upon at the 20-minute mark. So now we're at the 50-minute mark. And then we're arguing about who's going to do the research, where we're going to resource all the materials. And meanwhile, the adversaries are just chucking everything at the wall. Now, at the 59-minute mark, the allied team sends the most perfect spitball that has ever made it in the history of time to the target. It makes the exact spot and will stick there the rest of the life of this wall that it's hit. And the buzzer goes off, and the guy goes, adversaries win. And we sit there and we're perplexed. Why? Well, because you're missing the objective of the war, right? And the most was the objective. We need to look at that, as in the Department of Defense, we're so risk adverse, and in corporate America, we're so risk adverse that we're afraid to put in that maybe B line player, my B bench, right? But that may be the best capability to put forth, but we're so afraid of the risk associated with it that we just rather put in a wounded Tom Brady, right? And the first ring, and we have to get beyond that. We have to learn, we have to take a risk. DOD doesn't allow for that. Corporate America really doesn't allow for that. But in this age and where we are with, I say at cyber war, right? We have to. And the CISOs need to be able to define risk, the risk reduction strategy behind taking that risk, that I'm putting this player in, I've got these people surrounding him. So if he falls out, I've got his backups right there on the field with them. But we need to try this one because we're not winning using this one. And that is a real big challenge. I don't know, and I'll ask, you both, is that something that you've experienced in your lifetime, in your careers?
Oh yeah, I'm an ex-military officer, so of course I've experienced it, right? But in private sector, right, corporate America, we it's interesting. The paralysis through analysis is a real thing, right? We will sit in a room, right, and talk about meeting to meet, and then meeting to talk about the decision that we made. Are we sure that that's the decision we want to go with? Like, I have been in organizations where it's like moving a tinker to make some of the most simple decisions on the planet. And you look around the room and you're like, why are we, right? And we're talking about, sometimes millions of dollars, at millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars at risk here. But because this thing of cyber and the nuance of the adversary is so nebulous to the business, it takes them just so much to make a decision. And we're sitting there as a CISO like, really? Like, this is pretty simple to me. but they go round and round and round the merry-go-round we go on which direction we're going to go. And I've been there. And it's funny, right? Most of the time, the easiest way for me to help them make the decision is if I can tie it to a control or some aspect of regulatory need, right? That if we don't do this, the regulators are going to get after us. And they're, oh, wait, the regulators? That tends to be the only thing that helps drive it, right? So it's the equivalent in football, right? Hey, we are guaranteed to lose this game, right? If we don't do these things, there's going to be major repercussion across our brand and across all sorts of things, right? Like I'm a Cowboys fan. And as much as I love the Cowboys, me and Jerry Jones have a very adversarial relationship. If I could fire our owner, I would. But I still love my Cowboys, but I have to make that discernment when I'm making my decisions on how I'm going to operate as a fantasy football owner of do I allow my fandom to help me make the decision and pick the Cowboys, even though I know in my heart of hearts that it's a bad operational choice because the decisions we're going to make that the coach is going to make and that the owner is going to make and what happens with my team? Probably not.
Oh, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, the meeting to have a meeting about a meeting to schedule a meeting about a meeting is ridiculous. Corporate America spends more time, scheduling and when I was in the Pentagon, I had, an EA, a chief of staff, and then 2 lieutenant colonels trying to work my schedule to schedule meetings about meetings that we would get there. And, in the Department of Defense, it's all about getting concurrence, right? You have to get everybody else on board. And it's because nobody wants to be the one to say, oh, I did that. And the way I'll give myself props on this one thing in my lifetime. I went into the Pentagon in January of 2019. The DFAR rule had been in play since 2015 about having companies comply to the NIST standard 800-171. And I just went in and said, all right, I'm going to build a maturity model and we're going to make people compliant to it. And I didn't give anyone a chance to have a discussion about anything else. Like, we obviously aren't doing what we need to be doing as far as risk, right? The massive risk we have where all these people think they're compliant. We know that they're not. So now we're just going to audit them and we're going to show them that they're not compliant. It takes bold leadership to be able to step in front of and say, I'm the one who understands the collective risk and I'm going out this way. That's what a coach does. I understand the collective risk of what my special teams are doing.
Some coaches. So you're a Steelers fan for a reason, because Mike Tomlin is that coach. He is that type of leader, right? So versus you look at the Cowboys, Jimmy Johnson was that type of leader, but the owner is averse to that. So if you've got a CEO or leadership above you as the CISO or as whatever CSO or whatever that role is, if your owner or your CEO of the organization is averse to that type of leadership, you're not going to be in a job long. But I also say, then that also probably means that's not the job for you, because ultimately you're going to deal with an incident of something that is not your fault, that you've tried and you've got all your CYA emails and all your CYA documents where you've been trying to tell them, but now here you are. Because what a lot of people tend to forget, CISOs don't own a damn thing. Most CISOs, we're moving in the direction where CISOs are taking over technology, and you're seeing chief technology security officers where they own infrastructure and security. But for the most part, most CISOs don't own anything. Now, with that, but we're then accountable when a breach happens, or we then lead incident response. How the hell is that a thing? How is it possible that we don't own anything? We try and get the organization to move in the right direction to mitigate risk, but then the business makes the decision on what risks are going to be mitigated, right, and which ones are going to be accepted. But then when that accepted risk gets breached, we're responsible to respond to it and ensure we recover from it. It is the most insane dichotomy on the planet, but we've signed up for it. It's what we do. It's what we deal with.
And I can't agree. So I have 2 moments of that just pop in my mind, right? I was on something called SC Cyber. It's a cyber board in South Carolina, and Nikki Haley was the then governor. And the big breach of the data And the governor pulls us all in, and she's like, "What happened?" And all of the analysis in the room, these people were trying to do. I'm like, "Guys, you didn't encrypt it. That was simply, you made a business decision. You didn't encrypt the data. It's simple. You made a business decision, and the repercussions are this now, right?" And in the Department of Defense, I can tell you there were many things that we came into that on. And you're right. If you don't have the right leadership to let you lead, and I was blessed at the time that I was in the Pentagon that I had leaders that let me make the decision. They relied on my knowledge, my expertise to make the decision. I had a great manager, right, that said, "Team owner, you go do it." And unless you have that, I'm one of those people that if I'm not in that environment where you're going to put me in a place to succeed, I won't be there long. And corporations need to understand, if you're moving through CISOs like really quickly, and your CISO is in the room going, nodding their head and saying all is good, you have the wrong CISO sitting in the room, right? The CISO there should always be a challenge set.
Right.
There's always something, right? Because we're in electronic warfare. Once we plug one hole, there's going to be another hole to find. And that assumption has to be that, if I could, and right now that's, what my job is consulting with large businesses on how that they can take cybersecurity and actually bring it into their executive level. And unless you get companies to understand that you're never going to be good in this area, right? The best you can be is protecting your brand and your people and your IP, right? That's the best thing that you're going to be able to do, is do your utmost best to do that. And corporate America needs to understand that a breach which causes your brand to be looked at as weak or something that can't be trusted or has been penetrated, it's a bad thing. And you damn well better listen to your CISO.
Right. Agreed.
Once, and the adversary, no matter what the adversary is, the art of war, that you just stick to that, right? The best way to defeat anybody or anything is from within. Yep. And agreed. Our adversaries know that. I don't think that the executive level actually understands that when you talk about cybersecurity and what you need to be able to provide it. It may be more expensive than they think it should be, but at the end game, the next war, I keep trying to tell everybody, the next war, you've seen it in Ukraine and Russia, a stalemate, and your time in the Air Force, sir, thank you so much. But you understand, kinetically, we're at a match, a dead heat, right?
Right, 100%.
The next war is won or lost in the non-kinetic cyber field, period, end of story. When you have hospitals getting ransomware, school districts getting when you're watching KillNet go after pipelines.
Right. That's where I was going, right? Critical infrastructure, right? I'm a former CISO in the critical infrastructure space. And having had that role for 2 years made me more fearful of what power means in this country than ever before. It's like when you see something, you can't unsee it, right? I can't unsee what I learned being a CISO in critical infrastructure, and it scared the bejesus out of me. So, listen, with that, I have to drop. I've got to run to a panel that starts in 15 minutes, and I don't know where I'm going. So, I appreciate you both. Yes, Katie, we've got to do this again because there's so much that I think you and I would align on. We could have a really fun conversation.
You two need your own show. This was fantastic. It's been a pleasure listening to you guys rip off of each other. This is great. Thanks. Really great to meet you, Larry.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Hey, nice meeting you too. All right. We'll talk soon.
Okay. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.